Γεια σας από την εκπομπή Βιβλιοβούλιο στο κανάλι της Βουλής. Έχουμε τη χαρά σήμερα να φιλοξενούμε στην εκπομπή μας τον κύριο Ντάνιελ Μέντελσον, ένα πολύ σημαντικό νεοϊορκέζο κλασικό φιλόλογο, συγγραφέα, κριτικό λογοτεχνίας. Ήρθε στην Ελλάδα με αφορμή το νέο του βιβλίο «Μια Οδύσσεια, Ένας Πατέρας, Ένας Γιος, Ένα Έπος». Έχουμε τη χαρά να μπορούμε να διαβάσουμε 3 πολύ σημαντικά του βιβλία. Το πρώτο ήταν «Η Χαμένη», το οποίο αφηγείται την ιστορία 6 μελών της οικογένειάς του που χάθηκαν στο ολοκαύτωμα. Το δεύτερο είναι το «Περιμένοντας τους βαρβάρους», μια σειρά εξαιρετικών δοκιμίων. Και το τρίτο είναι το «Μια Οδύσσεια», όπως είπαμε, στο οποίο αναμειγνύει την ιστορία του ομηρικού έπους με την προσωπική του οικογενειακή ιστορία και τη σχέση του ίδιου με τον πατέρα του. Mr. Mendelssohn, we are very glad to having you here.
Thank you.
In Greece, and especially in the Greek Parliament channel, TV channel.
Very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you again. And would ask you, is Odyssey finally and a father and son affair?
Homer's Odyssey?
Homer's Odyssey.
Well, it's interesting because I think of the 2 Homeric epics, I think certainly in America, most people are more likely to be familiar with the Odyssey than with the Iliad because people read it in high school. I think even people who have not read the Odyssey have some idea that it's about this guy and he's been away in a war for a long time and he's trying to get back to his wife. Mm-hmm. That part of the story is so famous that even if you don't know anything, you know that. But one of the interesting things about having taught this class in which my father decided to be a student, I think because of his presence, I became much more aware of the extent to which the Odyssey is a father-son story and not just a husband-wife story. And in fact, you know, if you just look at it, the importance of the father-son story is emphasized from the very beginning. It begins with the son, Telemachus, now an adult, in search of his father. That's the first thing that happens in the book. And the last thing that happens in the book is Odysseus is returned home and he goes looking for his father, Laertes, who's now living outside of town. So the whole epic is framed by a concern about fathers and sons, and inside of that is this husband-wife story. But as I always tell my students, you know, when Odysseus comes home, there's a series of reunions as he reveals his identity to different people, and of course his dog. And but the climactic reunion is not with his wife, it's with his father. That's the last recognition scene. So I think the Odyssey is always telling you that the father-son relationship is the most important relationship, which of course, you know, we know ancient Greece was a heavily patriarchal society, and so this is what patriarchal societies worry about, fathers and sons. It's the most important relationship. Also for some modern people, you know.
And what is the role of marriage, especially of women, in the Homeric epics?
Well, I mean, of course, women are incredibly important in the Odyssey, much more so than in the Iliad. In fact, as I'm sure you know, there was a period when, in the 19th century, where people thought that the author of the Odyssey must have been a woman because the women characters are so strong in the Odyssey. But women characters are important in the Odyssey because, look, it is a story about marriage, and he's trying to get back to the one woman who is satisfying to him. And so one could think of the experiences that Odysseus has during his journey home as a series of trials in which he sees different islands and he sleeps with different women or has encountered with different women Calypso, Circe, Nausicaa, and they're all alternatives to Ithaca and alternatives to Penelope that he has to investigate before he can finally get to the true island and the true wife. And of course, marriage is an incredibly important part of the Odyssey because the Odyssey is haunted by the Iliad, and the Iliad is the story of what happens because of adultery.
Yeah.
Adultery is the great cloud that hangs over the Iliad, and so the Odyssey in some sense has to correct that by showing a healthy marriage, a successful marriage, you know.
Okay.
So I think that's why marriage is so important in the Odyssey, that we have to see that there's a good marriage, and that's so important.
As you said, in the end, Odysseus find his father Laertes, and Telemachus found his father Odysseus. What about you? Did you find your father through Odyssey?
Well, yes. I mean, I was already quite close to my father when we undertook this journey, but you know, a lot of my book is about how the experience of teaching him the Odyssey in the classroom and then on going on this cruise and experiencing these sort of Odyssean voyages with my father revealed things about my father's character that I had not really appreciated before. You know, obviously one of the great messages of the Odyssey is that travel transforms you. When Odysseus comes home after 20 years, he's transformed not only by time, but because of the experiences he has had. And I think that when we were, as I describe in the book, particularly when we were on this cruise, my father himself became sort of transformed by the experience of being on this luxurious cruise. And I was able to see aspects of his character that I think he felt he had to suppress when I was growing up. You know, he was a rather stern parent and a little bit hard, I think, but when he was on the cruise, he was sort of relaxing into a version of himself that was a little more generous and a little more easy than he usually was. And so in that sense, my story, and I draw attention to the parallel in my book, to that sense, my experience with my father in the book is like Telemachus's experience with Odysseus in the Odyssey, because a lot of the Odyssey is these two men, now grown, the son and the father, didn't know each other for their whole lives, for Telemachus' whole life, and now they have to learn to know one another. So I think that's such an important part of the epic, and I wanted it to be part of my book.
Was he open-minded at this age at 81?
Yeah, I think my father was very open-minded. Look, he put himself in this crazy position of deciding he's going to be in an undergraduate class with 17 and 18-year-olds, you know, because he was interested in learning. So I think my father was rather a severe character, but he had a very open mind. He was always willing to have different kinds of experiences.
You have talked about this cruise with your father on the traces of Odysseus. What was it more significant in this trip? It's a strange trip at the same time.
Yeah.
Nowadays to follow these traces, what can we find?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I was surprised at how serious the passengers on the cruise were. They were, you know, I thought, who goes on an Odyssey cruise? It was actually interesting because they were quite serious. To my mind, you know, I'm happy to see these different sites. To me, the poem is enough. I don't really need to go to the places where Odysseus goes.
Yeah, of course.
Because I can go there in my mind. But it's always interesting. You see the palace of Nestor and Pylos and the ruins of Troy. But what the best thing that happened on the cruise was my father, who was a very kind of, you know, he was a scientist. He liked concrete facts. You know, eventually he kept saying this line. He said, well, you know, he would look at the walls of Troy and he would say, nah, the poem is more real than the place, you know. And I was very impressed by that, because at the end of the day, you don't need to go to these places if you want the Odyssey. The text of the Odyssey is already enough, you know. It's nice to see them if you can, but I don't think you learn anything about the Odyssey and its themes by going to Çanakkale and looking at the walls of Troy. You know, it's a nice extra, but it's not necessary. So, during the Odyssey cruise, I don't think I learned a lot about the Odyssey, but I learned a lot about my father, you know.
Okay. The words Odysseus and Odyssey have, as you say in your book, the same origin than the Greek word odini, pain. Nowadays, travel isn't as painful as it was in the past. Used to be.
Well, it depends if you're in business or economy. You know, I think it's,
Does it have, however, the same meaning?
Does Odysseus, does what have the same meaning?
Travel, the word travel.
Well, no, I mean, it can't, because we
the journey.
We travel so casually now. I think that, you know, one imagines that the ancient audience for the Odyssey was much more impressed than we can be, because we're always traveling. You know, to us, to go to Greece for 3 days, like me, it's not that big of a deal, you know. So I think inevitably one loses a little bit of the sense of amazement that the Odyssey originally inspired, because travel was a big deal in the ancient world. You know, people did not travel casually, and let alone travel all over the Mediterranean. And, you know, so I think we've lost a little bit of the sense of pain, the pain of travel, the arduousness of travel, that I think is part of Odysseus's name. You know, Odysseus has this name, the one who causes pain and the one who suffers pain. Yeah. And he suffers pain because he's associated with travel, which in those days was difficult. You know, it was not easy.
Another subject. Is there any similarity between Trojan War and conflicts of nowadays? And who are
the Trojans and who are the Greeks?
Who are the Greeks?
I don't think so much the Trojan War.
It's something between East and West, or?
I mean, it's interesting, because on the one hand, the Trojan War, and certainly both in Homer and later Greek literature, the Trojan War is figured as a conflict between the East and the West. Yeah. But in Homer, the Trojans are essentially identical to the Greeks, you know. They worship the same gods, they're basically the same civilization, so it's not so obvious why these people are fighting each other, except Helen. You know. Yeah. But I don't think it's about cultural difference. I think the ancient text that tells us really much more about warfare in a modern sense is Thucydides. If you want to read about war in the ancient world in a way that's relevant to the modern times, I think you should read Thucydides, not Homer, you know. Homer is about many things, but I don't think it's about the modern geopolitical situation, you know.
To which Homeric king could you compare to Donald Trump?
To which Homeric king do I compare Donald Trump?
It's a strange
I compare
question.
Donald Trump to Thucydides.
I don't think he's Nestor. Right?
Thucydides. He is not even. He isn't even a king. You know, there's only one character in ancient literature that reminds one of Donald Trump, and he's not in Homer. He's again in Thucydides, which is Cleon. Cleon. He's totally Cleon, you know, but nobody in Homer, because Homer could not imagine a character like Donald Trump. It's too much even for Homer, you know. Because the king, whatever you say about the kings in Homer, they're kings, they're impressive characters. Even, you know, Agamemnon is kind of a jerk, but he's still impressive, you know. I don't think Trump is part of the Homeric imagination. You know.
Are you worrying about rise of nationalism or extreme perceptions in these days in the Western
very
world?
Worried. I think I'm worried about it in the United States. I'm worried about it all through Europe, as we know. It's on the rise. And I've been saying for years, and my friends used to think I was crazy, but now they're not so sure, that I think starting about 6 or 7 years ago, we're entering a period which is, I call it the new 1930s. You know, we're in a period like the 1930s with the sort of proto-fascism on the rise everywhere in democracies. You know,
there are similarities.
These demagogic figures who suddenly have appeal in democratic, formerly liberal democratic nations. I think it's very dangerous. And I have to say, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. You know, the rise of Trump and the damage that Trump has done in the United States so far reminds you that all civilization, and I say this also as someone who has written about the Holocaust, all civilization is just a set of conventions. All these institutions that protect us are just a set of conventions, and they can easily disintegrate. It's astonishing in the United States in 2.5 years how much has disintegrated in terms of just civil behavior and the way that people behave. You know, there's a tremendous rise in bullying in schools. You know, these white supremacist acts of violence, it's all on the rise. And it's on the rise because the leader is giving permission for people to be like this. People understand that. It's incredibly dangerous. That's why we study history.
And it happens very quickly.
It happens very quickly. I still remember something when I was working on Khamenei.
Yes.
I was interviewing Holocaust survivors. And one of them said to me, he said, you know, you have to remember, I was a middle-class person like you. I had a job, I had children in private schools, I paid my taxes. He said, in 2 weeks, we were like animals being hunted. He said, that's how long it takes, 2 weeks, you know. So when you study the history of civilization, you learn only one thing, which is that civilization is very fragile.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing that right now. It's not a happy picture.
Let's talk a little bit about Kaváfi. You have translated Kaváfi to English. Just a question. He seems to be now, 85 years after his death, more famous than 30 or 40 years before.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I think all kinds of factors. So there are a couple of poems that have always been famous. Perimenondas τους Βαρβάρους, Ithaki. I think, certainly in the United States, Kaváfi was very much helped by the funeral of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis because they read Ithaki, and my friend Mike Keeley, Edmund Keeley, is the translator, another translator. He said suddenly Kaváfi became a bestseller. You know, he said you couldn't find a book anywhere, so that helped a lot. But I think And there have been a number of translations into English in the past 15 years.
Yeah.
So that helps because it gets the poems out into the public.
10 or something.
Yeah.
10 translations.
And I think, you know, Kaváfi is a poet whose understanding of history and human nature is extremely, you know, based on an extremely long view of history.
Yeah.
Because he's the true Greek. He sees everything, the whole line of history, not just classical Greek history, but Hellenistic, late antiquity, Byzantium. Yeah. And so he has the long view. And I think in times of political unrest, his vision suddenly seems to make a lot of sense. He's not a triumphalist poet. He's not a celebratory poet. He's a poet who says, you know, all of civilization comes to an end eventually. Yeah. All the empires come to an end. All the leaders end up being executed or deposed or failed. And it's okay, you know. Another time will come and it will be okay. So I think the Kaváfian mood is sort of suited to the present moment, you know.
Okay. A final question. What is the element that connects you so deeply with Greece and Greek culture?
I couldn't tell you exactly how it got started. I fell into it early when I was 11 or 12. And it was, you know, it's a combination of things. As a friend of mine used to say, thinking about why American children would be interested in ancient Greece, you know, he said, naked statues and bad behavior, what could be better, you know? Because you hear these myths and they're so interesting and so fantastic and the stories are so great. So, I don't know. I think I was already hooked by the time I was like 13 or 14. You know, I was trying to learn ancient Greek from a book, and I was making a model of the Parthenon in my basement, you know, for years I was working on this. So it's always interesting to think why you get interested in things, but I got lucky, you know.
Mr. Mέντελσον, thank you very, very much.
Thank you for having me.
Ένα σημαντικό μυθιστόρημα της μεταπολεμικής ευρωπαϊκής λογοτεχνίας. Θα μιλήσουμε απόψε για το βιβλίο του Χάινριχ Μπέλ, «Μπιλιάρδος στις 9.30», που κυκλοφορεί από τις εκδόσεις Πόλης, εκπληκτική μετάφραση της Μαργαρίτας Ζαχαριάδου. Είμαστε εδώ σε μια υπόγεια, μάλλον στεγασμένη έκθεση βιβλίου που γίνεται στην πλατεία Κοτσιά, απέναντι από το Δημαρχείο, δοκιμάζοντας κατά τη διάρκεια των περιηγήσεών μας διαφορετικούς χώρους και διαφορετικές ατμόσφαιρες. Στο βιβλίο του Μπέλ πρωταγωνιστούν τρεις γενιές αρχιτεκτόνων, παππούς, πατέρας και γιος. Κεντρικό θέμα του βιβλίου είναι ο τρόπος με τον οποίο η γερμανική κοινωνία από τα χρόνια του Μεσοπολέμου και μέχρι την πτώση του καθεστώτος σιγά σιγά μπαίνει ολόκληρη μέσα στη ναζιστική ιδεολογία. Αυτό ο Μπέλ χρησιμοποιεί μια συμβολική γλώσσα για να το πει. Ονομάζει αυτούς οι οποίοι προσχωρούν στη ναζιστική ιδεολογία και στις πρακτικές του ναζιστικού καθεστώτος μετάληψη του βούβαλου. Είναι η φράση κλειδί για να καταλάβουμε πώς, χωρίς να αναφερθεί ούτε μία φορά στο Χίτλερ, χωρίς να μιλήσει ούτε σε μία σελίδα για το ναζιστικό καθεστώς, δείχνει πώς η γερμανική κοινωνία βυθίζεται ολόκληρη μέσα στην πιο επικίνδυνη ιδεολογία του Δευτέρου Παγκοσμίου Πολέμου και αντιμετωπίζει όλες τις συνέπειες. Ο παππούς αρχιτέκτονας είναι αυτός ο οποίος έχει φτιάξει την επιχείρηση, ο οποίος έχει δημιουργήσει μεγάλα έργα και η δράση του βιβλίου εξελίσσεται το 1958 που είναι η χρονολογία εκείνη που συμπληρώνει τα 80 του χρόνια. Ο γιος μοιάζει αδιάφορος και σαν να διεκπεραιώνει μηχανικά την κληρονομιά του πατέρα του. Από την άλλη όμως πλευρά βλέπουμε ότι μολονότι έχει πολεμήσει στην αντίσταση, μολονότι έχει λάβει μέρος στον πόλεμο, μολονότι έχει αντισταθεί στο Χίτλερ και έχει διωχθεί και έχει καταφύγει στην Ολλανδία για τις ιδέες του, παρόλα αυτά είναι βυθισμένο στο κενό. Αυτό το μηχανικό στυλ που έχει στη ζωή του μας δείχνει ότι από τη μια πλευρά οι Γερμανοί προσχώρησαν στον ναζισμό και από την άλλη και εκείνοι που δεν προσχώρησαν αναγκάστηκαν να αντιμετωπίσουν το κενό και την σιωπή. Η τρίτη γενιά που είναι ο νεότερος κληρονόμος μοιάζει να ανοίγει μια καινούργια προοπτική, διότι για παράδειγμα ενώ ο πατέρας του έχει ανατινάξει ένα σημαντικό αβαΐο, ο ίδιος έχει αναλάβει να το ανοικοδομήσει. Το βιβλίο του Μπέλ πρέπει να πω ότι δεν είναι εύκολο. Έχει δύσκολες αφηγηματικές τεχνικές, είναι πολυπρόσωπο, πολλές φορές ο αναγνώστης πρέπει να καταβάλει ιδιαίτερη προσπάθεια για να ξεχωρίσει και τα πρόσωπα και το ποιος μιλάει και από ποια οπτική μιλάει. Παρ' όλα αυτά είναι ένα βιβλίο που όταν μπει κανείς στο κλίμα του δημιουργεί μια συναρπαστική ατμόσφαιρα, είναι γραμμένο σε εξαιρετικά λογοτεχνική γλώσσα, την οποία βοηθάει πάρα πολύ η μετάφραση της Μαργαρίτας Ζαχαριάδου. Γενικά είναι ένα βιβλίο με το οποίο αξίζει κάθε κόπο να αναμετρηθεί ο αναγνώστης, συνειδητοποιώντας ότι ο Μπέλ είναι ένας από τους συγγραφείς που πριν αρχίσει η συζήτηση των νεότερων γενεών στη Γερμανία στη δεκαετία του 60 για την αναζήτηση των ενόχων, για την αποκάλυψη και την συνειδητοποίηση της ενοχής, πριν από όλα αυτά είναι από τους πρώτους συγγραφείς που μερικά μόλις χρόνια μετά το τέλος του πολέμου έχει τη δυνατότητα, την τόλμη και κυρίως την καλλιτεχνική ικανότητα να απεικονίσει έναν τόσο δύσκολο και δύστροπο κόσμο χωρίς να προβεί ούτε μία φορά σε μία καταγγελία, χωρίς να καταδικάσει, αλλά μόνο μέσα από τη συμβολική και την αλληγορική γλώσσα της λογοτεχνίας.